Jonathan Gerber here to welcome you to this evening's tour of the Old City and the Rampart Walks. So thank you very much for being with us. I'll turn it over to the Jerusalem Portfolio team to introduce Eve Harow and the tour she's going to give. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to what the connection with Israel and Jerusalem and the Jerusalem Portfolio is. About 2 years ago, we set out to build an investment strategy specifically focused on Israeli companies. And we built the Jerusalem Portfolio. We built the technology that allows just about anyone to open an account and fund it in less than 3 minutes. You can use it for gifting. You can actually gift a brokerage account to a friend or loved one to commemorate a life event. And the portfolio we've designed invests in over 130 Israeli-focused companies in a variety of sectors, including, of course, technology. Israel's famous for its technology, but healthcare, banking and financial services, and of course, defensive. And it's a wonderful platform. And we encourage you to give it serious consideration, both for your own investment strategy, for ideological reasons, for investment reasons, and for gifting. And the results, although our regulators require me to tell you that past performance is not indicative of likely future results, the results have been phenomenal. Last year was a 26% year. So Israel is a booming, thriving economy with a strong regulatory system and strong systems of control. And it's a great way to invest and a great way to gift for yourselves, for your IRAs, for your living trusts. And without further ado, I want to now turn it over to the Jerusalem Portfolio team and then to Eve Harow to tell you a little bit about what we're going to see tonight. And again, thank you very much for being with us.
We will now be joining Eve Harow on a walking tour of the Old City of Jerusalem from the vantage point of the recently opened Ramparts Walk. Eve is one of Israel's leading tour guides who has the unique ability to fuse modern Israel with its history and the Bible. With her, we will walk the walk as she talks the talk, bringing the glorious history of Jerusalem to life. Here's what we will be viewing. Starting from Jaffa Gate and ending at Lion's Gate near the Temple Mount, this fascinating walk on the ancient walls gives direct views of the Christian and Muslim quarters and beyond to the Jewish area. We will see and learn about the Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives, the Dome of the Rock, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Redeemer, and famous synagogues. There are also historical and religious battle sites that we will review outside the walls as the history of this sacred city unfolds before us. A stop at Damascus Gate gives us a glimpse of the Roman conquest amidst original fortifications. And now, Eve, it's over to you.
Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Israeli tour guide and podcaster, public speaker. Thrilled to be with you today doing the Northern Ramparts Walk in Jerusalem's Old City. So we're starting off here in Jaffa Gate. Just going to take a look up here, so we'll see what we've got. When the walls around the city were built by Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1530s, beginning of the Ottoman Empire here in Israel, this was closed, and it remained closed for many, many years. There was a moat here. What we have across the street is what's called David's Citadel. It's misnamed. As far as we know, it has nothing to do with King David. But this was a main fortress palace at the opening to the Old City, and there was a moat. There's behind the taxi cabs here. There's just a little bit of it left, but this entire road that we're looking at here was a moat. The wall was breached in 1898 intentionally to allow for the entry of Kaiser Wilhelm to Jerusalem, and he could come in on his horse and, and feel like very important. So this was opened up, and now, of course, we have cars going in here. Under the road here, there was some kind of sewage leak or something a few years ago, and they had to fix some of the pipes. They dug up the road, and they found remains from a Byzantine road. So we're talking about 4th, 5th, 6th century when the Christians ruled the Holy Land. So this whole area just totally filled with history from all times. Over here you have what's called meticulation. These are not just designs. This is a way that you'd stand behind there and pour boiling oil over anybody trying to come into the city. And I just want to point out to you why this has always been a strategic site. Because if you look down and outside the Old City, you could see that we're high up. There's a deep valley below. As a matter of fact, there's a valley that rings the Old City except for the northern side, where we're going to be in a little while at Damascus Gate. And that's why also there is burial on the other side of the valleys. If here's Jerusalem's old city, then around almost all of it are deep valleys. And on the other side of those valleys, we have found graves from all ages. According to Jewish law, you don't bury inside the city. So we have the big cemetery at the Mount of Olives, which we'll see in a few minutes. We have graves this way from the First Temple period behind what's called the Begin Center of priests from the temple, 2,600-year-old graves. And we have this all the way through. Behind the trees here, down in the valley, there's a beautiful park. However, it was once a reservoir under the time period of King Herrod, who ruled Israel from -37 to -4. He had a very large reservoir that held water for a lot of the people that came to live here and that came on pilgrimage to the temple. Remember, before electricity, when you don't have pipes, you have to get water to places just by the power of gravity. And so he brings in water from way back, the hills way in the back that you can see are higher than Jerusalem. There's a lot of water that is sourced from there, and he had a whole network of aqueducts and tunnels, an amazing thing, started by the Hasmoneans, refurbished by him, that brought water into the old city of Jerusalem. You can also see on my left, on my right, on your left, the glacis, the sloped walls from when the Crusaders came in here 900 years ago, and they built a large fortress over here. They added to things that were already here, and that's classic Crusader defenses, the glacis. Now, and I'll say it at the end also, the best thing is for you to come here and do this tour live. This is, since we can't do that, this is kind of a stopgap measure, and I'm really honored that you asked me to do this virtual tour for you on the Ramparts walls here in Jerusalem today. Okay, all right, so this is a map of the old city. The whole business is like 1 square mile. We are standing over here now at Jaffa Gate, and I just wanted to point out to you the route that we'll be taking. On this golden line, we're going to be walking all this way past or over the new gate. We're going to continue through here past the Damascus Gate, all the way up here, Herod's Gate, also known as Flower Gate, to the corner of the old city, the northeastern corner, come down and out at Lion's Gate. There's another Ramparts Walk, which I understand some of you have taken, that leaves here at Jaffa Gate and goes south this way, along Zion Gate, on Mount Zion, and you come out at Dung Gate at what's near the Jewish quarter and what's near the Western Wall. This section of the Ramparts Walk, which is the part that surrounds the Temple Mount, is closed to visitors because of the tensions of the political situation. So we're going to be doing the longer section here that was just opened a few months ago. So this is really new. Even most Israelis have not been on the walls in this section of the old city. Okay, we're leaving now the area of Jaffa Gate behind me, and we're starting to head in this direction. This is the Christian quarter. The old city is divided into 4 quarters: Christian, Armenian, Muslim, and Jewish. It's not divided mathematically, and since the Armenians are also Christians, it really means that 50% of the old city is Christian. You have a few hundred Armenians living here, a few thousand Christians, a few thousand Jews, and well over 30,000 Muslims. And so we're going to be skirting mainly the Christian and Muslim quarters today, but they weren't always the Christian and Muslim quarters. So we've got different remnants from different time periods even within here. And you can see people living here, not going to film here, don't want to hurt their privacy. These are their backyards or their porches as we start our Ramparts Walk. City. You had Ottoman soldiers up here, and that's why you have these little openings so that they could look down, see what's going on. Sometimes it's just the width of of an arrow. And then between 1948 and 1967, when Jordan occupied the old city after Israel's War of Independence and before the 6-Day War, the Jordanians were up here as well. I just wanted to point out to you before we continue that this beautiful little neighborhood with the pink roofed houses and the green was the first neighborhood that was built outside the old city in the middle of the 1800s, and people didn't want to come out and live there. They were afraid to leave the walls of the old city. It was built by Sir Moses Montefiore. Now it is an incredibly expensive neighborhood. If you're $1 million, we'll maybe get you like a tear down. Yamin Moshe, there's a beautiful windmill there as well in the back, which never really worked, but the people here are not exactly lining up with their flour for the morning croissant. They're all doing fine. And you can see some of the hotels in the background as well. The famous King David Hotel with the green windows that huge block of the hotel, and behind it, looks like there's a little tower sitting on its roof. That's an optical illusion. That's actually the YMCA across the street from it. So that area was built up during the British Mandate period in the 1930s and up until 1948. Okay, we're at one of the corners now of the old city, and I just wanted to, this is called Kika Sahal. Lots of battles fought over here in 1948 and in 1967. This is also where the Crusaders made an attempt to get into the old city of Jerusalem 900 years ago. But I wanted to point out to you some of the things here that we're seeing now from the modern Jerusalem. Over this road this way, this is Jaffa Road, one of the major roads in Jerusalem. This is also where the light train now travels, so it's off limits to cars. And just to the right of it, if you see where there's a police car that's blinking its lights, in the grill work of the windows, there are the letters B, B's and B's, and that's because it's the original Barclays Bank from under the Mandate period. Very interesting picture, which was taken on May 12, 1937, the inauguration of King George VI. That's that same building, all lit up to celebrate the inauguration. And then to the right of it is what's called Kika Sahal, which is Israel's city hall. All right, so this is a big corner, very important corner for all the ages, very, very strategic place. Just walked a few meters, you can see now the side of the King David Hotel, and now clearly separate and across the street from it, the YMCA. I wanted to point out to you the section of the wall that we're not walking on today as it meanders south. And you can see that there are two towers, a tall tower with a thin tower with a top, and just to the left of it, kind of a cone-shaped building, that's the Church of Dormition. That actually lies outside the old city on Mount Zion. There were times in history when Mount Zion was inside the walls of the old city. Today it is outside. The city has contracted and expanded over time. It wasn't, when someone talks about the old city, let's say of 2,000 years ago, it wasn't necessarily the way that we're walking today. There is a Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion. Oscar Schindler is buried on that Protestant cemetery, as well as James Starkey, who we'll be speaking about in just a few minutes. Above the new gate, which as its name would imply, is the newest gate into the old city, leads right into the Christian quarter, gives easy access from outside the old city to the Christians living in this area, people living here, businesses as well, many churches, and over here an example of the Franciscan cross over the Terra Sancta. Terra Sancta, of course, meaning holy territory, holy land. You down the ramparts, again, I'm inside the old city, but you can see to my left the enormous building of Notre Dame, the hospice that was built by the French in the 1880s. This is a result of the Crimean War, which happened in the 1850s, where the Ottoman Empire was attacked by the Russians, and the French and the British helped them out. And this was on the background of a lot of religious tensions. This is nothing new here in the land, where the Christians felt that they weren't able to buy property and they weren't really able to do what they wanted to do in the Holy Land. It was being controlled by Muslims, and they made it extremely difficult for any non-Muslims to buy land. As a concession after the war, the Ottomans were forced to give land to European powers, and that's where you start seeing Notre Dame, which is a very large statue on the top of Mary holding Jesus aloft. That's a very unusual kind of a statue. There's a hotel in there now, and it's right opposite the new gate. That's also when during that same time period, that's when you have the Greek Orthodox Church starts buying land here, and the Italians and other European powers getting like a foothold here, especially in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land in general. Looking outside the old city now, towards the Plaza of Damascus Gate, which is the northern part of the old city, and it's beautiful with the palm trees, etc. And as this area starts opening up, I just wanted to point out to you, in the very back, that's the Mount of Olives. The tower there is part of the Hebrew University of Mount Scopus. Hebrew University of Mount Scopus begun in the 1920s. That's right, close to a quarter century before Israel is a state. We're already building towards having a state of our own. We've got a health fund, we're paying taxes, we've got unions, we have a defense organization, pre-IDF defense organization, and we realize that we have to have places of higher education. Hebrew is now becoming the, if you will, the lingua franca. Not such an easy decision, incidentally. The people who started the Technion, which is like Israel's MIT up in the north, actually wanted the language of the teaching to be in German, which was seen as the language of science. There were other places where they wanted the language to be French, but there was a decision that was made that Hebrew was our language, Hebrew was the Jewish language, and that it should be brought back as a living language. Only the second time in the history of the world that a language that is considered dead or really just used as part of ritual and prayer becomes the everyday language. The first time was also the Hebrew, and that was under the Maccabees. So we're used to doing this already, and it's made a huge difference here in terms of culture and identity is the language that you use. So that's Hebrew University. It was an enclave in 1948, surrounded by the Jordanians. Israel used it as a jumping off point in 1967 during the Six-Day War to liberate the old city. It was rebuilt. The university had been destroyed. There's also a branch of Hadassah Hospital up there. So if any of you ever wondered why there are two Hadassah hospitals and two Hebrew University campuses, it's because the original ones were off limits and taken out in 1948 and then rebuilt after 1967. David Resnick, the architect who rebuilds the campus post-67, was clearly traumatized by the years where we couldn't get there, and the campuses, the buildings are very large and they almost feel like bunker-like. Like you could tell that he's still, you know, very much aware and wary of a war situation, and he regrets it. And he said afterwards he regretted building the campus that way. So now we can already see the Mount of Olives, and that means that we're on the northerns, we're walking north, but we're coming up towards the eastern side of the old city. These two black canisters are actually modern cisterns. Israel has water security, which is really incredible, desalination plants and drip irrigation. And why is that so unusual? Because the Middle East is almost always under a drought. A good part of the Middle East is a desert. And even though parts of Israel are not a desert, we have a rainy season and a dry season. It almost never rains between, let's say, May and November. And as a result, the issue of water has always been paramount in this part of the world. Read the Bible and see how many times it talks about a story that happened near a well. How you share the water, how you distribute the water, where the water is coming from is huge. Possibly the most important prayer service in the temple was at the end of Sukkot, where they had the water service, like the prayers for water, because then it's going to be the rainy season. And if we don't have rain, we can't grow food, we can't eat. So what some people do, even in this modern day, is they have cisterns like this that catch rainwater during the winter. The law in Israel is you don't have to pay for water that you catch on your roof. And so they collect water here as kind of like a backup. But of course now we have modern pumping system and modern company, and we have the Israel water carrier that takes water all over the place, injects both desalinated water from the plant and uses spring water and uses aquifer water and water from the Kinneret. So the water here is on a very high level, and thankfully, despite the fact that we've got over 9 million people now living in the country, a lot of agriculture, including exporting fruits and vegetables, swimming pools, dishwashers, all the modern accoutrements of life today, we have yet to ever have to turn off the spigots. It's a very big thing. A lot of very bright people have worked hard on this, and it is tremendously added to Israel's security, to the point now where we can even export water to our neighbors, and that perhaps will also lead to a time where we can have peaceful resolutions of conflicts, not because they necessarily love us, but because we have a commodity that they want, and that's just fine too. So speaking about food, Jewish mother that I am, always speaking, thinking, or preparing food, we come upon a garden here in the walls of the old city. Now, Israel is known for 7 particular kinds of food. Obviously, we grow much more now in the modern world, and mangoes and cherries, but there's 7. This is my very, very well-used Tanakh with all its little pieces of paper. And we're talking about barley and wheat, and then we have figs and pomegranates and grapes, dates and olives. And each one of our holidays is actually associated with one of these species. For example, Hanukkah, where we eat potato pancakes and a lot of very oily donuts. Well, the reason for that is because it has to do with the olive oil. And I'm reading to you, though, here from the Bible, from Numbers, and it is chapter 13, and it's called Parashat Shlach Lecha, and it's a very, very difficult story that connects very much with our tour. You're watching this just a couple of days before the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is the day where many people fast. It's seen as the day that commemorates many of the calamities that befell the Jewish people, the destruction to both the first and second temple, the beginning of the Inquisition, a lot of terrible things that befell us, and I'm sure you all know very much our difficult history when it comes to anti-Semitism and enmity. But the reason and the origin for specifically the 9th of Av being the day that we still mourn is almost the lines of, well, you cried for no reason, so you're going to now be crying for a reason. And that's the sin of the spies that I'm reading to you outside of my Tanakh in what I just read to you. The Jews are in the desert. They've gotten the Torah at Sinai, waiting to come into the land. And Moses sends out people to scout out the land. Latour et haaretz. It sounds a lot like to tour. Okay, they're not going for a nefarious reason. They're going to see what awaits us as we come in to conquer the land. And 10 out of the 12 spies come back to the desert with a bad report on the land. Everything is huge, everything is frightening. We're not going to be able to come in. And as a result, that generation dies out in the desert. That generation is not allowed to enter the land because of showing an appalling lack of faith in God, who's just brought us out of Egypt and done all these wonderful miracles for us. Only 2 people, Joshua and Caleb, say, no, it's okay, it'll be all right. Yes, the communities there, the villages or the towns that we're seeing, are very well fortified, and we have found that. Tremendous fortifications from the mid-Bronze Age, but you have to interpret why that was. And it was because really the civilizations were falling apart within those walls. So we have to be very careful. You can look at something and you can misinterpret the reason for why it was there. It's kind of like, do we go into fear or do we go into awe? In Hebrew, it's the same word, yir'ah, and you can take it either way. So what happened? They went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehov, etc., etc. They reached the Wadi Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes borne on a carrying frame by 2 people and some pomegranates and figs. Now, that's exactly what grows here in the land of Israel during the summer, pomegranates, figs, and grapes. And the symbol for the Ministry of Tourism, for the tour guides, is 2 people, and here I'm showing it to you live, 2 people carrying a bunch of grapes. So you can see the bounty of the land. So we're not looking at the grapes and saying, oh no, it's like really scary. We're looking at it and saying, this land is bountiful, this land is plentiful, and it will give us a lot of fruit. So when I look at this vineyard that's growing in this private garden, for me, it's not just a vineyard, but it's a sign of a promise that one day we will come into the land, and even though we were exiled, we did come back. So I don't see fruit as just fruit. I see fruit as connecting us to the Bible and connecting us to our faith, and our faith in God, but also our faith in each other, that one day we will be able to return to our home, and that's exactly what we have done. I wanted to point out to you this road that runs around the old city. This is actually the ceasefire line between 1948 and 1967. We're standing inside the old city, which was controlled by the Jordanians. They destroyed the Jewish quarter. They threw out all the Jews. So we could not have been here before June 11th of 1967. And so the neighborhoods that opened up behind me were in the Jewish part of the city. Usually not the wealthiest neighborhoods, because if you had a choice, you really didn't want to live on a ceasefire line, because sometimes the Jordanians would just shoot across, and there were people who got killed just walking down the sidewalk during the years between 1948 and 1967. You can see the tower in the back. I mentioned before the different European powers that built here. So that large tower in the back was built by the Italians. And going back this way, in this direction, you can now see the tower in the old city of the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer, right? Because we're in the Christian quarter over here. And again, opening up in this direction, we're going to soon be at Shar Shechem, at Damascus Gate, and once again behind it, the beginnings of the Mount of Olives Ridge. Mount Scopus is part of the Mount of Olives Ridge. It's about an area that's constantly been battled over. Everywhere we walk, you can see the bullet holes in the wall, okay, that left their mark as they shattered the stone. Beneath us here, and we can't see it, but I'm going to tell you about it, is a quarry that's called Zedekiah's Cave. Who was Zedekiah? Tzidkiyahu. He's the last king when the Babylonians come, when Jerusalem, the first temple is destroyed in minus 586. The Babylonians have come, and they're the ones who destroy the temple and take over the land, and they exile Zedekiah. There's a cave beneath us that's known as Zedekiah's cave. It's actually a quarry where some people think that the stones for building the first temple built by King Solomon, that's where they came from. It's a very cool place to go into. There's concerts there and plays, obviously in non-corona days. Why is it associated with Zedekiah? Because there are some people who say that that's how he escaped from Jerusalem. Before the Babylonians caught him, he somehow escaped from Jerusalem and came out in the Jordan Valley area, but an animal ran by the opening of the tunnel just as he was coming out. The Babylonians caught him. They killed his children in front of him. They blinded him, and they took him out to exile in Babylon. But this is a very interesting confluence of a few things. We're still here in the Christian corridor. You can see people's satellite dishes. You can see the canisters, right? The water tanks to collect water. And in this direction over here, you can see the side of a big gray dome. That is the holiest place in the world for many Christians. That is the dome over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which according to Christians is the area where Jesus is crucified. And that also tells you that during that time, so we're talking about in the 1st century, this area was outside the old city walls, because if he is also buried there, and there's a cave under the church where some people believe he was buried, Jews are not buried within the walls of a city. We spoke about that at the beginning of our tour. So that shows us that this area was actually outside of the old city walls at the time. You can see kind of the hodgepodge on the roof over here. In this direction, you can see a golden dome that is starting to peek up. That is the Temple Mount. That is the Dome of the Rock, which is a shrine, a Muslim shrine built in the 8th century over where Jews believe was both the first and the second temple on Mount Moriah. But I just want to show you, since we're here in the hot summer, this is modern, not so modern, but before modern air conditioning, in the last few hundred years, this was a method that people would have to cool down their homes. This was a part of their roof. They would put cold water in these clay pipes, and when the breeze came in and the water would catch the breeze, and it would lower the temperature in the homes. So the walls have kind of come off, the plaster's come off, but we can see the remains of what was here before we all got super spoiled and were able to control our temperatures in our homes just by a flick of a little button. That's really just in the last few decades. Up until then, people had to make do very creatively with what they could do. Damascus Gate, the northernmost part of the old city. That's where that big plaza is that you see people going in. And if you look closely, you can actually see that they're on a ramp. And the reason for that is that we have remains of the ancient Damascus Gate. I'm going to be taking you down there, and that's under the walkway where the people are now going. We're taking a little break from the top of the ramparts to go down underneath and look for the ancient gate of Damascus Gate. So let's head down the stairs. Now, why is this called Damascus Gate, but in Hebrew, Shar Shechem? Shechem actually is Nablus, because gates define usually where they led to. So in the north of Israel, we have Damascus, and we also have Nablus. Jaffa Gate, where we started our day, for example, is not called Jaffa Gate because there's oranges planted near it. It's because the pilgrims used to come up from the port of Jaffa, and it faces in that direction. In Arabic, Jaffa Gate, incidentally, is called Bab el-Khalil, which means the gate of the friend. How do you say friend? Friend is Chaver, Chevron, where the tombs of the patriarchs and matriarchs are. The gate also faces south, leading to Hebron. So the names tell you the importance that people put on them, and that's why very often the same place will have a few different names. It was a guard room for Roman soldiers. Now, we do not think that this part existed during the part of the temple. The temple is destroyed as part of the first revolt in the year 70. There's another revolt a few decades later from 132 to 135 when the emperor of Rome is Hadrian. It's called the Barcode Revolt. Rabbi Akiva is also a part of that. They're watching Hadrian turn Jerusalem into a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina, and they can't sit with that. And so there's a revolt where for about 3.5 years we have an independent state of Judea in the area south of Jerusalem today, between Bethlehem and Hebron, the area that's in modern terms called Gush Etzion. But we think that this is the guard tower for Roman soldiers after the Barcode Revolt. Now, this is very much Herodian, all right? For those of you who've been to Jerusalem and seen the remains of the Second Temple that Herodian refurbished, this is classic Herodian building, flat stone with a margin around it. So this is all very likely in secondary use, all right? And so we're going to continue on through here. This is an olive press, okay? We spoke about olives before. I don't think it was in here when the Roman guards were in here, but it gives you an idea of how they pressed olives back in the day. And this is a way of exiting the Ramparts Walk. We're going to be going back upstairs. But I just wanted to go outside with you here for a minute. Shalom. Seme. Mashula video, and you can see the really beautiful base of the original gate here, the beautiful chiseled stones. As I said, once again, the Herodian style, and this beautiful archway over here as well. Hadrian had a massive arch which no longer exists, just outside of Damascus Gate, that was showing his power and how he ruled over here. And we have found some remains of that, but nothing really. When part of the Roman Empire at the time was to put up milestones. It was also a way of projecting power. Where a Roman mile is 0.92 of one of our English miles. And when they would have a milestone that said, for example, 14 Roman miles to Jerusalem, where in Jerusalem? Damascus Gate. This is ground zero for the milestones and for the Roman Empire in Jerusalem. This is seen as the most important gate. Underground, we are under today's Damascus Gate. You can see a whole motley collection of different time periods, the different stonework, the different arches. That looks to me like Crusader, kind of the elbow capitals and the pointy arch. Always people wanting to defend this side of Jerusalem. This is the only side of Jerusalem, the north side, that's not surrounded by a deep valley. So this is why when people want to conquer Jerusalem, this is really the side that you can come in on because it's ground level. It's easy to come in this way. Now, this is a replica here of the Jerusalem portion of the Madaba map. The Madaba map is a very famous map that was found. It's a mosaic floor of a church in Madaba in Jordan, and I was there a few years ago. And this shows you the centrality of Jerusalem for the Christians, okay? And this also has to do with theology. This map shows a lot of the churches. It shows complete destruction on the Temple Mount. They do not rebuild the temple. As far as we know, they don't have anything on the Temple Mount. This is also part of replacement theology, right? Christianity replacing the Jews as God's favorite people. And the map is most definitely a map with an agenda, and it shows us what the Christians were feeling. So over here on the map, this depicts Damascus Gate, where we are right now. And this is the Cardo. The Romans always built a grid-like kind of city, and the Cardo ran north-south, almost always. That's the main street in the Roman city. In Jerusalem, though, you also have a secondary Cardo, which went this way, both coming right off of Damascus Gate, which is also called the Gate of the Pillar, because there was a very famous pillar there as well, showing the conquest. This is the map around the city. This is a depiction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre coming off the main Cardo, the Nia Church, which was built also towards the end, the Temple Mount, not seeing really anything of importance there. And of course you can see the Greek, and this is the Holy City of Jerusalem. Now the map looks like it's tilted because we're on the north side, so you have north and south and east and west. That's not how we do maps today. We have the north at the top of the map, but this is how they did ancient maps. People worshiped the sun, worshiped towards the east. Even the Christians, the apses of their churches and the direction that they pray in is east. Jews who are not in the land of Israel pray towards the land of Israel. So it could be that you pray east, but it's not because you're praying east. You're praying towards Israel, which happens to be east of you. And that's a very, very important distinction. So with the advent of the compass, maps start now with the north being at the top, and that becomes like the framework for maps. But in the ancient day, this was correct. This is how they did it, with the east on the top, the north on the left, the right on the south. The country of Yemen, in Hebrew, Yemen is to the right. South means to the right, and the country of Yemen is to the south of Israel. And then, of course, the western side on the bottom of the map. So this is a very important map. This is depiction of the section that was found, 6th century Byzantine Church, Transjordan, Jerusalem in the center of the map, and of course, some of it was destroyed, other sections of it that still remain. In the middle of the 19th century, we have pictures that tell us what Damascus Gate looked like in 1857, 1860, 1900, under the British Mandate in the 1920s, and 1967, but just before Israel liberates the city again under Jordanian rule. Some of the flooring here, these huge stones, obviously also hundreds of years old, and different stones that were found here, different stonework and pillars that were found in this area as well, also over here, carved out at different times. And all soldiers, well, they're not always on guard duty, shall we say, and they look for ways to play around. And one of the things that was found here on the floor is a scratched out game that we know from other sites that we have found in Israel, Caesarea and others, a game that the Romans played. Not sure exactly how they played it. I guess for us today it would be some kind of like tic-tac-toe or parcheesi or something. And so we have found remains of what the Roman soldiers did when I guess they thought that the boss wasn't looking at them, and how they spent some of their time. Just as in other parts around the old city, we have found ancient tombs. In this area as well, where you can see the cliffs, there are tombs here for the First Temple period. Remember, this probably wasn't part of Jerusalem in the First Temple period. It didn't come up this far. There's an area here called the Garden Tomb, where some Protestants feel that that is where Jesus was buried, outside the old city. Okay, that there was a mistaken identification. And beyond these buildings here is another famous place that was just reopened recently, belongs to the French, called the Tomb of the Kings, possibly the burial place of Helene, a queen who comes here, converts to Judaism, comes here from Abyssinia with her sons, and lives in Jerusalem at the end of the Second Temple period. And what you can see behind me are the cranes of the modern city of Jerusalem. Very bad tour guide joke, the national bird should be the crane, but you can see the excitement, how huge Jerusalem is. If really up until about, we saw the pictures down at Damascus Gate, Jerusalem, until maybe just a little more than 100 years ago, was really just pretty much the old city. Now it is expanded to be larger than it's ever been in her entire history. What I said about the fruits in season, beautiful pomegranate tree. By the way, the pomegranate is not related to any other tree. Very, very unusual tree. To the left of it, an olive tree. No olives on it now. Olive season, as we know now, having to do with Hanukkah, so you're talking November, December. And in the back, of course, with the very large leaves, and I'm not saying that because I'm named Eve, is, of course, the fig tree. Now, I wanted to take you to look down into this area that we're coming up to. This is called Herod's Gate, probably named after Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great. He's done by -4, this area. And you can see beyond it to the left, a very beautiful building with flags on it. Across the street and a little bit down, that's the Rockefeller Museum. In the 1930s, in the Mandate period, this museum was built to house some of the antiquities that were being found at the time. Incredible collection in this museum. Wood beams, possibly from the Temple Mount, the collection of ivory from the kings of Megiddo. It's unfortunate that because of where it is, a lot of people don't come to visit. It's under now the purview of the Israel Antiquities Authority. It's a branch of the Israel Museum, but there's a story to the building itself. It's called the Rockefeller Museum. The famous family is the one who gives the money for it. But when it was going to be opened in 1938, one of the premier archaeologists here at the time, a Christian named James Starkey, he was the lead archaeologist at Lachish, one of the very important Judean cities in the days of yore. He was on his way here, and because he had a long white beard, Arabs mistook him for an Orthodox Jew and murdered him and actually dismembered him, and that caused the delay of the opening of the museum. And this was already in the 1930s. So a lot of the political issues that we have here now didn't just start post-67, but they started way before. Many people feeling here that this is much less a territorial war as it is elements of a religious war and nationalistic ideas. So that's the Rockefeller Museum, definitely worth a visit. The building itself, absolutely magnificent. And behind it, you can see, just about on the level of the tower, a building with many arches. That is the Mormon Center in Jerusalem. That's a branch of Brigham Young University. And when they put this here a few decades ago, one of the reasons that we feel that they wanted to be here, particularly on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, is because Mormons baptized posthumously, and that they wanted to go into the ancient Jewish cemetery with tens of thousands of graves on the Mount of Olives in order to do that. They were told, they signed an agreement that they wouldn't do it, and we certainly hope that they've kept to that. So there you see that, and then you see just to the right of the building with arches, and by the way, they have wonderful concerts there at the Brigham Young University. They have beautiful organ, beautiful theater. That is the Augusta Victoria Hospital, which is one of the three towers that symbolizes the Mount of Olives Ridge. As we noted before, the tower of the rebuilt Hebrew University on Mount Scopus, the Augusta Victoria Hospital, and further down, we'll see it in a few minutes, the Mosque of the Church of the Ascension overlooking the Old City. While we have names for the different quarters today, they weren't always designated as such, and there were for hundreds of years Jews living in what's now called the Muslim Quarter. There's been an effort made since 1967 to buy back some of the property the Jews once owned, or to buy other property and to settle Jews in different neighborhoods all around the Old City. And what we've come upon here now, and you can see how beautifully kept it is one of these compounds where a few Jewish families live here. Unfortunately, because of the security situation, they have to have security. But for the most part, the neighbors are okay, and fear should not dictate not living in a place. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Israel at all, given the neighborhood, the bigger neighborhood that we're in here in the Middle East. So there's some young families here living already for quite a few years in this area of the city. Jerusalem is mentioned over 700 times in the Tanakh, in the extra books after the 5 books of Moses. And one of the mentions, or more than one, but I'll read one to you, is from the prophecy of the prophet Zedekiah, one of the last prophets. He prophesies, we believe, at the very beginning of the Second Temple period. After that, we don't have prophets anymore. And he prophesies for the days of the Messiah, when the good times roll. And I'm reading to you here from Zechariah, from Zechariah 14. Then the Lord will come forth and make war on those nations, as he is wont to make war on a day of battle, meaning the people who are warring against us. On that day, he will set his feet on the Mount of Olives, near Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall split across from east to west, and one part of the mount shall shift to the north, and the other to the south, a huge gorge. All right, so you can see that that hasn't happened yet. If you were wondering if you somehow missed the Messianic times, still to come. And the Mount of Olives, now that is the Mosque of the Church of the Ascension with the skinny tower there. Further along on the ridge, you can see a building with an Israeli flag flying from it. That's Beit Hoshen. That's another area where now there's an apartment building where Jews are living. Continue on and you see the ancient cemetery on the Mount of Olives, where I wouldn't be surprised if virtually all of you had a relative buried, whether you know it or not. Menachem Begin is buried there. Henrietta Zold, who started Hadassah. Eliezer ben Yehuda, who's the one who really rejuvenates the Hebrew language. Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, who is the chief rabbi in the pre-state days. So very many famous people that are buried there. The building on the top with the red roof and the arches, the 7 arches, was actually built under the Jordanian conquest between 48 and 67, and much of the basement was built from Jewish gravestones from the Mount of Olives. A good number of gravestones were desecrated under the Jordanians. Now no longer, of course, Jews can be buried there once again. There is also a large grave of the Jews who were killed in 1948 in the Battle for Jerusalem, who had been buried in the Old City, later on after 1967 reinterred on the Mount of Olives, as well as the Jewish cemetery from Gush Katif from Gaza, which was also reinterred when Israel left Gaza in 2005, the so-called disengagement, and there is a mass grave of these people as well on the Mount of Olives. Tremendous amount of history on the Mount of Olives. You could spend all day literally just on the Mount of Olives, but you can see how close we are here to the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, once again, the Golden Dome just in front of us. And back over towards the area of the Mount of Olives, you can also see these onion domes, these little golden onion domes, which tells you that that's the Russian Orthodox Church. So the Mount of Olives, of course, very important to Christianity, and many churches dotting the hill as well. Here's a better view that now that we're closer to the Rockefeller Museum. You can also see that it's sitting on a mountain. So at some point over the hundreds of years, this mountain was actually dug through to create the road that comes below us. And over behind me here, and we are pretty much now at the northeastern corner of the old city. And this is a very big sports area for the Muslim quarter, for the Arabs kids living here. They've got quite a nice, very impressive soccer field and basketball court. And this is again within the old city. And looking in that direction, you should be able to see a white dome. That white dome is the middle of the Jewish quarter. That's the Horva Synagogue. Horva means the destroyed place. We talk about, again, during this time before the 9th of Av, we talk about the Chorban of the temples. That means the destruction of. Cherev is weaponry. The Horva Synagogue was built in the 18th century. It was destroyed by the Arabs where the Jews couldn't pay back their debt. It was later on rebuilt in the middle of the 19th century when the debt was paid back. And it is now, and then it was destroyed once again by the Jordanians in 1948, and it has, and around the year 2000, it was rebuilt. It now functions again as a synagogue in the heart of the Jewish quarter, and that's got the white dome. So the domes really symbolize here what we call the Holy Basin, right? We've got the golden dome of the Dome of the Rock. We have the gray dome that we saw earlier of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and we have the white dome of the Horva Synagogue in the Jewish quarter, all within very close proximity in this area. We're walking south now on the east side of the ramparts, and I stopped to just turn around to show you once again the university on Mount Scopus, and below it, where you can see the cars driving, that is a road that leads down to Jericho. If you follow that off to the right, it goes into a tunnel named after Naomi Shemer, she who writes the song Jerusalem of Gold and adds the paragraph after the 67 war about going back to Jericho. This is the reason also why another name for the Lion's Gate, which is where we're going to end our tour, is the Jericho Gate, because this is how you would leave the old city to get down to Jericho. And this is something that happened in the 1967 Six-Day War. There was a navigational error made in this area, and an Israeli armored personnel carrier and tank fell off the cliff in this area. And as a result, Israel wasn't able to secure the entire old city with the ring of soldiers. But because of that, there are some people who feel that gave the Jordanians an opportunity, like an escape route, to run out of the old city and down to Jericho and, of course, into Jordan proper. And perhaps that ultimately, obviously, didn't save the lives of the Israeli soldiers who were in that tank at the time, but it might have saved the lives of other soldiers who were fighting in the old city, and had the Jordanians felt that they had no escape, they perhaps would have fought harder and there would have been a greater toll in lives. No way of knowing, of course, but that's one of the theories. Row here of mulberry trees. You see the berries growing here, they're red, the riper ones are purple. Mulberries are not indigenous to the land of Israel. They were brought here by Baron Rothschild, who at the end of the 19th century is trying to help the Jews that have come, the first Aliyah, 1882, in response to many pogroms and violence against the Jews in Europe. Of course, this is before the Holocaust and that ultimate of 6 million. And he ends up really starting off the wine industry here in Israel. But what he tries to do as well is have the silk industry. And it turns out that silkworms live on mulberry trees. So mulberry trees were brought in here. Nature is really responsible for a lot of our dyes and our colors. We talked about the pomegranates before, so anybody who's eaten a pomegranate while wearing a white t-shirt knows that pomegranate stains. That is why we have a piece of a very old Torah scroll in a synagogue in Akko that the ink is pomegranate juice and it's written on deerskin. It's a very, very unusual combination, but totally fine. And we also have other colors and dyes because in the olden days, the color that you wore showed your standing. Most people just wore cotton and linen, white or off-white. If you wore blue, royal blue, then it showed that you could afford the blues, let's say from the Trunculus murex, from the little snail that comes from the sea, where they had a very important dye inside, and also royal purple. Those colors both come from the snail. Tolad shani, which was a red dye. I'm speaking about colors that were worn by the priests and by the kings. You could even say cardinal red these days. Tolad shani is actually a worm that lives on an oak tree. And so people needed to use nature for their colors and for their dyes. And because they were very expensive and very hard to come by, only the wealthy could afford them. This is why on the tzitzit, you'll see sometimes a blue string on some of the tzitzit that men will wear. That's coming back as we have rediscovered the source of the dye. That's also why the Israeli flag has the two stripes of techelet on it, to remind one of a talit, to remind one that we are a holy nation under God. Colors are very, very symbolic. Colors, smells, herbs were very symbolic in the ancient day. And once you understand that, then you can also appreciate nature in a whole new way. So from this tower, we can see a lot of the very important sites within the old city of Jerusalem. Between the flag and the trees, the two gray domes with a cross on them, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in the Christian corridor, just off the Cardo, which also makes sense, the Roman Cardo. Moving up along in the horizon, we have the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer Tower. Continuing along, the White Dome, which is the Horva Synagogue in the center of the rebuilt Jewish corridor. And just to the left of it, the upside-down cone and tower of the Church of the Dormition on Mount Zion, outside of today's walls. And then, of course, coming in closer to us, we have the Golden Dome, the Dome of the Rock, on the Temple Mount, on the site of where both temples stood. Looking now over to the east in this direction, just below us here, we have a Muslim cemetery running along this ridge. A good part of the reason that the Muslim cemetery was put here is because just to the south of us, it's what's called Sha'ar HaChamim, the gates of the redemption, where according to Jewish tradition, the Messiah will come through. Knowing our aversion, though, to death and to dead bodies, Muslims felt if they put a cemetery here, the Messiah won't be able to come. We're not worried about it. Everything, God willing, should be okay. And the Kidron Valley, which is the valley that separates this, what's now called the Old City of Jerusalem, from the Mount of Olives, a lot of different traditions having to do with the Kidron Valley from every different religion. The judgment will happen here. And of course, the Mount of Olives, we have on there even, we think, graves of the prophets and possibly even of one of Solomon's wives. It says Pharaoh's daughter. So this has been a cemetery for a long time. And part of, as what I explained before, the massive necropolis that's all around the old city of Jerusalem, and a lot of the buildings here as well. And as we mentioned, the 4 churches. And way out in the back, we already have the beginnings of the Judean desert. So the stories of David running from Jerusalem, city of David, just to the south of here, running out to the desert, people escaping. The Judean desert is just near Jerusalem. This ridge over here, very many people mistakenly call the watershed because this side is so green and fruit trees and so fertile, and the other side is already leads down towards the Dead Sea and towards the desert. It is not the watershed. The watershed is actually a little bit to the west of us, and we know this because the water in the Kidron Valley drains out to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has a catchment basin of 40,000 square kilometers, which is what you would expect from the lowest place on earth. The western part of Jerusalem, the rainfall there empties out into the Mediterranean, and over here on the eastern side empties out into the Dead Sea, with a lot of meaning in terms of weather patterns and other things that are beyond the focus of today's tour. We're just going to have to do another one, but just something that I did want to mention. Top of Lion's Gate right now, and beneath me is the gate, and this road is known as the Via Dela Rosa. According to Christian tradition, mainly the Franciscans about 800 years ago, this is where Jesus comes off the Mount of Olives and comes up on his last day. And there are churches all through here. And usually when we're not suffering from a pandemic, You would see people walking all the way through here, tremendous numbers of tour groups. Every once in a while, someone dragging a big cross on his shoulder, recreating that last walk. Where the trees are, a little bit up the block, are the entrance to what's known as the Bethesda Pools. Remains there of pools from the Second Temple period. This area would fill with water and flow down into the Temple Mount. There's a beautiful Crusader church that remains standing there called St. Anne's. This whole area also was a pool during the Second Temple period. It's now been paved over. And that wall over there where you can see the Israeli border policemen, they're letting Muslims into the Temple Mount to pray. There's only one gate where non-Muslims can go into, the Mulberry Gate. The Muslims can access the Temple Mount on all the other gates, and that is, now that wall over there, part of it, and we'll see that in a minute, that will be our last stop, are the remains of the northern edge of the Temple Mount during the Herodian period and the Second Temple period. This is the last stop on our Ramparts tour, and maybe the most exciting part of all. This is part of the ancient Temple Mount. You're looking at, this is the north side. Around the corner here is the east side of the massive temenos, the massive religious platform that Herrod builds as he expands the mount itself. You can see once again the telltale sign of Herodian stone, headers and stretchers. Here's the short side. Here's a long stone going this way. Some other stones, also Herodian stones, incorporated into the wall. Other parts are from different time periods. Now we're closer to that gate where you can see people being checked, of course people wearing masks as well. And this whole line here, this whole wall line, is the line of the northern wall of the Temple Mount area. You can see the minarets, the whole line of minarets over here as well, which of course symbolize a mosque and a Muslim prayer place. There's also madrasas, there's also schools, Muslim schools, and further up here the remains of the Antonia fortress, the fortress that was built to overlook the Temple Mount to make sure that the Jews weren't rebelling. Underneath it, the Struthian pools, also for water, because it slopes a little bit down here, and as we said, water has to go with gravity, so this is slightly higher than the Temple Mount at the time, and a lot of water collection in this area and then into the Temple Mount. So this is, and again here we've got the Mount of Olives over on our left, the Israeli flag flying, the cemetery, and really so much of our history is here, not just our history here, but a tremendous amount of world history here. And it is really a privilege to be able to have walked on these ramparts. I'm so glad that they've been opened, and share with you just a little bit, kind of like a smorgasbord, not a full meal, of the history, the magnificent history of Jerusalem, a city that was desolate for so long, that so many people thought was lost. And once again, the capital of the Jewish people, a vibrant, beautiful, thriving city, and really an honor to be able to guide you through here today.
Thank you so much, Eve Harow. You did a remarkable job, and we'll be back for more.